Morning, everyone. How you doing? I'm Russell Rucker. I'm here for another constitutional talk. And today I'd like to talk about what led up and the events of December 16th, 1773, which is when the Boston Tea Party took place. Now, on May 10th, 1773, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act. The Tea Act was designed to compete against illegally smuggled tea into the American colonies. So they were trying to get more of the tea out of their warehouses and to market. And so they allowed it to be shipped duty free from England. You still had the taxes from the Townshend Acts that were paid in America, however. And they were trying to push the idea that they had the right to tax, something the colonists were disputing. But on November 28th, the Dartmouth arrived. They had 114 crates of tea aboard their ship. The Loyal Nine and the Sons of Liberty met in Farrell Hall, and the crowd got so big they had to move to the South Meeting Hall, which was the largest meeting hall in Boston. And Dr. Thomas suggested that they should just dump the tea in the water. This was a couple of weeks before the Boston Tea Party actually happened, so he was really the first to suggest it. But during the meeting, they made an agreement that they would guard Giffin's wharf, which is where the ship was docked. Paul Revere was one of the guards that helped guard Giffin's wharf. And so they were down there guarding the wharf. Meanwhile, there were bills being posted around town suggesting that you could be a victim of the Mohawk Indians attacking if you consumed or sold the tea. So apparently they were going to instigate a problem with the Indians if you were caught doing that. It was kind of a fear tactic. The Mohawks had been engaged in a war up in New York, and a lot of settlers had been murdered, really back and forth, and the whole area was kind of evacuated for a time. Eds and Gills ran the Boston Gazette, and they had a long meeting room in the upper room of their facilities there, of their warehouse. And the Loyal Nine and Sons of Liberty did meet up there. On December 2nd, you had some consigners resign. See, they had to sign for this tea. And so they got them to resign. On the 15th, 2 more ships arrived. The Beaver was one of them. And they arrived sitting in the harbor there. And they had till the 17th to sign for the tea, or it would have to be returned. The governor and 2 of his consignees that were his children would not sign off, and the owner of the ship did not want these vessels returned. Obviously, they're trying to sell a product. Now we get to the 16th, which is the day of the event. Benjamin Eads is holding a meeting in his parlor. Now, if you remember, Eads was part of Eads and Gills of the Boston Gazette. And he held these men there till dark when they masked up. They used coal to darken their faces, and they had masks, disguises made up so they wouldn't be recognized when they went down to the wharf. And at dark, it broke up, and they took off. At John's crane shop, he was passing out masks. Thomas Crafts and his father spent the day handing out disguises. So there was really this organized effort from the Loyal Nine and the Sons of Liberty to get these people in the street. And they were having a big meeting down at the South Meeting House. Samuel Adams and John Hancock were there, really activating up the crowd, getting the crowd all worked up. And about that time, these Mohawk Indians, or people disguised as Mohawk Indians, came into the crowd, whooping it up, yelling war cries, and they took out of the hall. And a number of them started to storm out of the South Meeting House. And they proceeded down to Griffin's Wharf. And at that time, Dr. Thomas held the rest of the crowd in the South Meeting Hall for 2 hours talking about the evils of tea. I've heard it reported that this was some kind of joke or something that they were talking about, but really it was serious. See, Dr. Benjamin Rush had already produced a paper talking about the dangers of tea, and they believed it weakened the immune system. Now, that was the theory at the time anyway. And so he held that crowd there for 2 hours. They arrived down at the dock. The crowd, about 2,000 people were there to help them. And they boarded the ships. And the commander of the group passed the order to start breaking up the tea. And they went down in the hulls of the ship, and some of them are passing the crates of tea up to other members that are in their disguises, and they're using their hatchets with the disguises and breaking them crates, and they're throwing it in the water. John Crane, if you remember, he was helping pass out disguises earlier. He was down in the hull of one of the ships. And a crate fell on his head. He didn't get it. He tried to raise it up, but he somehow tripped or fell back, and a crate fell on his head, and he was knocked down. So they took him out of the ship, and they took him down the street to a local carpenter shop, and they laid him in a bed of sawdust. They thought he was dead. So that went on for a while, and eventually he came to. So they destroyed all the tea off of these 3 ships. I think it was something like 341 crates. Well, then another ship arrived full of tea. The William arrives, and it gets stuck off of the coast of Cape Cod. But it's unloaded, and it's put into a warehouse, and some of the tea is taken to the David Newsom Company, and it's being sold. Well, the Sons of Liberty get wind of this, and they go break into the warehouse, and they destroy the rest of the tea and throw that into the drink. And this is in March when they found this other ship and that. And then they donned their masks again, and they broke into the David Newsom Company, and they broke apart all that tea, all the tea they could find, and they threw that in the river. Well, in the harbor. All this is going on. That's a very interesting thing, you know. The Sons of Liberty got involved in the fight over the Stamp Act. And here they are still working at it through the course of the Tea Act. And they're trying to stop sale of English goods. And they're really fighting to get this accomplished. As soon as this tea was destroyed, the ships that were in the harbor, because they were still surrounded by other ships that weren't carrying tea, they left port. They didn't want their products being destroyed, so they went out into the sea. They didn't know what to do. Britain passed a Boston Port Act, and they surrounded Boston by June. They get started on June 1st, and they closed down the city to all trade. They went into Boston, and they passed the Quartering Act. and they housed soldiers in it. This is the beginning of the big crisis that really caused the Revolutionary War. Now I have here a map of Boston. It's an old map from 1769 that I've been working on a little bit. The newspaper shop is over here. Here's the only way in to Boston. It's called the Bottleneck. And the Ed's shop is over here, the Boston Gazette. The North Church is right here. So when they start meeting, they're meeting down at the South. Let's see if I can find it here. The South Meeting House down here. And Griffin's Wharf is right down here. So they march from the South Meeting House down to Griffin's Wharf. I don't know if you can really see that real well, but it's not that far down to Griffin's Wharf down there. The Liberty Tree that we hear talk about quite a bit is right over here at Essex and Orange. So the Bottleneck is right here. So when Paul Revere leaves Boston, he's got to go through, or Dowles leaves Boston, he goes through the Bottleneck down here. Paul Revere's up here, and he takes this ferry across to, well, he takes a boat anyway, where there is a ferry to Charlestown, but he takes a boat over here, and that's how they had to get out of the city. So it's just kind of interesting, the layout of what's going on here. I just thought you'd be interested in that, and think about what they had to do to give us the liberty that we so take for granted today. And think about that for a while. We're approaching the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. So think about that for a while, and we'll catch you next time on the next Constitution Talk. Thank you. Have a good day.